Today is December 19th. It's the 354th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. General George Washington loses nearly all of his battles against the British in the first 2.5 years of the Revolutionary War. After an early victory in Boston in 1775, he's run out of New York in 1776 and Philadelphia in 1777. By the end of 1777, his army is abandoning him, and some in the Continental Congress are talking about removing him from command. It's against this backdrop that on this day in 1777, Washington's army of 12,000 Continental soldiers marches into Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and sets up camp for the winter. They are worn and weary, exhausted from battle, and ill-equipped for the cold and snow and the long winter ahead of them. 20 miles to the southeast, the British have quartered in Philadelphia for the winter. They have plenty of silver with which to purchase all the necessary food and clothing to keep their army fit through the bleakest part of the year. In contrast, the American Continental Army has staggered into a large clearing bound by the forests on Mount Joy and Mount Misery and the Schuylkill River. They used lumber culled from the nearby forests to build huts, little windowless log cabins that are drafty and dank. They build 2,000 of them over the next few months. Their shelter is meager, and food even more so. The hungry soldiers often subsist on a diet of fire cakes, a mixture of flour and water. Basic staples such as meat and bread are scarce. The forests around the camp quickly exhausted of game to hunt. If it's not fire cakes, it's probably pepper-flavored broth, which is hardly filling. It's cold and snowy, but there's not enough snow to melt and drink, just enough to prove a constant irritation by keeping the ground from drying out, which prevents the soldiers from drying out. Most of them would have boot rot if they had boots. But as it is, only a quarter of the 12,000 soldiers who enter Valley Forge on this day in 1777 have any shoes at all. Blankets and heavy coats are equally as scarce. The bitter cold combined with inadequate clothing and a limited food supply leads to a whole host of ailments. Soldiers who aren't malnourished suffer from diseases such as pneumonia, dysentery, typhoid, and smallpox. And medicine is, you guessed it, in limited supply. Why would they stick around? Why don't these soldiers just leave? Many of them do. They desert in large numbers, desperate for food, shelter, and warmth, a desperation that is greater than their will to fight. But those who stay, hunkered down for a long, dark, dreary, miserable winter, warmed only by their dedication to the cause and their devotion to their leader. General George Washington has some basic military experience thanks to the French and Indian War, but he really doesn't know what he's doing when he takes command of the Continental Army in 1775. He learns through trial and error, but he is exceptionally astute and learns many valuable lessons from his failures. He's a reluctant leader, a true sign that he is a born leader if there ever was one. Washington knows that the threats of exposure and malnutrition pose a greater danger to the Continental Army than does the British Army. He appoints his most trusted lieutenant, Nathaniel Greene, quartermaster general, in charge of locating and delivering much-needed supplies of food and clothing. And Washington petitions the Continental Congress for funding for provisions. Congress is in short supply of cash. The continental currency depreciates by the day and is virtually worthless. But by the end of January 1778, Congress gets the message, and by the end of February, a steadier stream of much-needed provisions is making its way into the camp. With more suitable clothing and food, the Continental Army begins to get back in shape. General Washington enlists Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a former Prussian army general, to train the army while in camp. Von Steuben provides his knowledge and skills to Washington without pay or rank until he proves his worth. Von Steuben's training regimen instills discipline in the troops and greatly improves morale. In February 1778, France signs an alliance pact with America, offering supplies both military and monetary. This greatly emboldens the army at Valley Forge. By June 1778, news of the British departure from Philadelphia for New York reaches the camp, and the Continentals prepare for pursuit. Those who have survived the crucible of Valley Forge and are renewed, replenished, and even more dedicated to their general, George Washington. The American Continental Army is stronger and more unified for having endured their greatest test of the war, the winter at Valley Forge, which begins on this day in 1777. But the cost is heavy. 2,500 American soldiers and 700 horses die at Valley Forge, not from battle or fight, but from disease, starvation, and exposure. There are 12 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. I reference a lot of sources when I write these episodes. Wikipedia is usually a good starting point to find some of those sources, but one of the resources I use all the time and I absolutely love is Forvo.com. F-O-R-V-O, Forvo.com. I'm giving up a secret here, but that is how I know how to pronounce all of these convoluted foreign words and names. If you've heard me botch a foreign language, word, or name, it's only because Forvo did not have it, which is a rare occurrence. So happy holiday hello to Forvo.com. And if you're still listening, turn up that electric blanket. Talk to you tomorrow.